The rain drummed against the classroom windows as Sarah Chen hunched over her desk, trying to make herself invisible. At 17, she had mastered the art of blending into the background, her small frame and quiet demeanor making her nearly forgettable among her classmates at Roosevelt High. The other students chattered excitedly about weekend plans and upcoming tests, but Sarah kept her eyes fixed on her notebook, where she was supposed to be taking notes on the Napoleonic Wars. Instead, she found herself sketching star maps from memory, her pencil moving with practiced precision as she traced the constellation patterns of distant galaxies. Her hand trembled slightly as she drew the Vega system, and she quickly erased the lines before anyone could see. These were not star charts from any Earth astronomy book. "Miss Chen," Mr. Patterson's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. "Perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on Napoleon's military strategies?" Sarah's head snapped up, her dark eyes meeting the history teacher's expectant gaze. Around her, 30 pairs of eyes turned in her direction, some curious, others hoping to see her stumble. She felt the familiar weight of attention pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. Napoleon understood that superior tactics could overcome numerical disadvantage, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. He used rapid deployment and concentrated force to defeat larger armies by attacking their weakest points. Mr. Patterson nodded approvingly, but Sarah caught something else in his expression. A flicker of surprise at the confidence in her answer, despite her soft delivery. She quickly looked down again, hoping he wouldn't ask a follow-up question. The bell rang, saving her from further scrutiny. As students filed out of the classroom, Sarah gathered her books with practiced efficiency. She had learned long ago that moving slowly made you a target for bullies, but moving too quickly drew unwanted attention. Everything had to be perfectly ordinary. "Hey, Sarah!" The voice belonged to Marcus Webb, the star of the soccer team, and one of the few students who occasionally acknowledged her existence. "You doing anything this weekend? Some of us are going to see the new Marvel movie." Sarah paused at her locker, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain to him. The casual invitation should have made her happy. Instead, it filled her with a deep, aching terror. "I can't," she mumbled, not meeting his eyes. "I have to study." Marcus shrugged good-naturedly. "Maybe next time, then. You're really smart, you know. You should speak up more in class." After he walked away, Sarah leaned her forehead against her locker door and closed her eyes. If only he knew how much she had already spoken up in her lifetime. If only he knew the consequences of her words echoing across star systems. The walk home took her through the quiet suburban streets of Portland, Oregon. Neat houses with white picket fences lined the sidewalks, their windows glowing with warm yellow light as families gathered for dinner. Sarah had lived in this neighborhood for 3 years now, ever since her parents had moved here from San Francisco. They thought the change of scenery would help with her adjustment issues. Her parents didn't know the truth about those issues. They thought their daughter was simply struggling with severe social anxiety and depression following some unnamed trauma in her past. The therapists had helped them develop coping strategies and prescribed medications that Sarah pretended to take. How could she explain that her nightmares weren't random fears, but memories of commanding fleets that could crack planets in half? At home, Sarah went through the motions of being a normal teenager. She ate dinner with her parents, discussed her day in vague terms, and retreated to her bedroom to supposedly work on homework. But once her door was closed and her parents had settled in front of the television downstairs, she allowed herself to remember. The memories came in fragments at first, like pieces of a shattered mirror slowly reassembling themselves. She remembered standing on the bridge of a ship that dwarfed Earth's largest aircraft carriers, its hull stretching for miles in every direction. She remembered the weight of a neural crown on her head, its crystalline structures interfacing directly with her consciousness to amplify her thoughts across the galaxy. Most clearly, She remembered the fear in their eyes. The Altarian delegation had knelt before her throne, their proud warrior culture reduced to trembling submission. The Centauri Trade Federation had offered her a quarter of their gross planetary product just to avoid her displeasure. Entire species had rewritten their constitutions to acknowledge her supremacy, and she had been only 14 years old. Sarah pulled out a hidden journal from beneath her mattress, its pages filled with technical specifications and strategic analyses written in a cipher of her own devising. She had been trying to piece together how she had ended up here on this primitive world, stripped of the power that had once made galactic empires tremble. The last clear memory she had was of the Council of Nine, the galaxy's most powerful beings, finally uniting against her. They had called her an abomination, a human child wielding forces that should have been beyond mortal comprehension. The final battle had lasted for 6 months, reshaping entire solar systems with its fury. She remembered making a choice in those final moments, as her flagship burned around her and her loyal fleet fell one by one to overwhelming numbers. Rather than face capture and inevitable execution, she had activated something her human scientists had been working on in secret. A temporal displacement device designed to hide her in the stream of time itself. The irony was bitter. She had succeeded in escaping her enemies, only to trap herself in a past where Earth was still a backwater world, its people unaware that humans would one day rule the stars. She was the empress of humanity's future, exiled to live among her primitive ancestors. A soft knock on her bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah, honey, are you okay up there?" Her mother's voice carried the worried tone that had become all too familiar. "I'm fine, Mom," Sarah called back, quickly hiding the journal. "Just finishing my history report." She heard her mother's footsteps retreat down the hallway, and Sarah allowed herself a bitter smile. A history report. If only her mother knew that her daughter had lived through more history than any human on Earth, that she had personally reshaped the political landscape of a galaxy. But with the memories came the guilt. Sarah forced herself to relive the worst moments, the decisions that had haunted her across time itself. The siege of Kepler 442b, where she had ordered the orbital bombardment of civilian population centers to break enemy morale. The purge of the corporate sectors, where entire bloodlines had been eliminated to prevent future rebellion. The creation of the servitor races, where she had uplifted primitive species specifically to serve as disposable soldiers in her wars. She had told herself it was necessary. Humanity was surrounded by hostile alien civilizations that viewed them as upstart primitives. The galaxy was a brutal place where only the strongest survived, and she had made humanity the strongest. But the cost had been measured in billions of lives, and the weight of those deaths pressed down on her teenage shoulders like a physical force. The worst part was the knowledge that she had enjoyed it. Not the killing itself, but the power. The absolute authority to reshape reality with a single command. The way entire species had hung on her every word, their fates decided by her whims. She had been drunk on power in a way that few beings in galactic history could comprehend. Now she was nobody. Sarah Chen, 17 years old, struggling with basic social interactions and afraid to speak too loudly in class. The contrast would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her lab partner in chemistry class asking about their upcoming project. Sarah stared at the message for a long time before typing back a simple response. These people had no idea they were communicating with someone who had once commanded the loyalty of trillions. As she lay in bed that night, Sarah listened to the sounds of her ordinary suburban neighborhood. Dogs barking, cars driving past, the distant hum of television programs. On any other world in the galaxy, those sounds would have been the noise of a thriving colony under her protection. Here, they were just the background noise of a life she was still learning to live. She closed her eyes and tried to push away the memories, but they always returned in her dreams. Dreams of standing before the Galactic Senate, her words carrying the weight of law. Dreams of star destroyers moving at her command, their weapons capable of reducing worlds to cosmic dust. Dreams of the neural crown's weight on her head, connecting her mind to technologies that could reshape matter at the atomic level. But mostly, she dreamed of the moment she had realized what she had become. Not an empress or a savior, but a tyrant whose power had grown beyond all reason or restraint. A teenager who had wielded the fury of stars and found herself transformed into something that even she feared. Tomorrow, she would wake up and pretend to be Sarah Chen again. She would struggle through another day of high school, avoiding eye contact and speaking in whispers. She would pretend that her greatest concern was passing her SATs and deciding which colleges to apply to. But deep inside, the Empress still lived, and with each passing day, the weight of her buried memories grew heavier. She had thought that hiding in the past would give her a chance to atone for her sins, to live a quiet life away from the consequences of her choices. She was beginning to realize that some sins followed you across time itself, and that power, once tasted, left stains on the soul that could never be completely washed away. The galaxy's most feared ruler was trapped in the body of a frightened teenager, and every day brought her closer to the moment when that carefully constructed facade would finally crack. The question that haunted her nights was not whether that moment would come, but what would happen to this innocent world when it did. Earth in this time period had no defenses against the forces she had once commanded, no understanding of the technologies she had mastered. If her past caught up with her, or if her control finally slipped, the consequences could be catastrophic beyond imagination. Sarah Chen pulled her covers up to her chin and tried to sleep, but the stars outside her window seemed to pulse with malevolent intent, as if the galaxy itself was searching for its lost empress. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she could feel something stirring. Not memories this time, but something else. Something that felt very much like anticipation. 3 weeks after the incident in history class, Sarah's carefully constructed life began to unravel in ways she hadn't anticipated. It started with small things that others might have dismissed as coincidences, but Sarah recognized the patterns immediately. Her instincts, honed by years of galactic warfare, were screaming warnings that something was terribly wrong. The first sign came during lunch period on a Tuesday. Sarah sat alone at her usual table in the corner of the cafeteria, methodically eating a peanut butter sandwich while reading a chemistry textbook. She had learned that appearing busy with schoolwork was the most effective way to avoid unwanted social interactions. "Excuse me," a voice said, and Sarah looked up to see a woman she didn't recognize standing beside her table. The stranger appeared to be in her 30s, with short auburn hair and wearing a crisp business suit that seemed out of place in the high school cafeteria. "You're Sarah Chen, aren't you?" Sarah's blood turned to ice in her veins. The woman's accent was subtle, but unmistakable to someone who had heard it countless times before. Altarian, a species that wouldn't make first contact with Earth for another 3 centuries, yet here was one of them standing in her high school cafeteria as if she belonged there. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. She closed her textbook and prepared to leave, every muscle in her body coiled for flight. The woman smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. "Oh, I don't think so. You have such distinctive features, Your Imperial Majesty. Even without your crown, you're quite unmistakable." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Around them, the normal chaos of the cafeteria continued. Students laughed and argued and complained about tests, completely oblivious to the fact that 2 beings from different time periods were having a conversation that could reshape the course of human history. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, standing slowly and keeping her movements casual. "I think you need to leave." "In a moment," the Altarian said, her disguise shimmering slightly as her true features began to show through. The human appearance was just a holographic projection, Sarah realized. Underneath was the familiar blue-tinged skin and elongated facial structure of the warrior race she had once forced into submission. "We need to have a conversation first." "Here?" Sarah gestured around the cafeteria. "You want to discuss galactic politics in front of 300 human teenagers?" "Oh, we won't be doing it here," the Altarian said, and Sarah caught the slight movement of her hand toward a concealed device. "We have much more private accommodations prepared." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. If the Altarians had found her, it meant they had somehow developed temporal tracking technology far beyond what should have been possible for their species. It also meant that other powers in the galaxy might have detected her presence as well. The carefully maintained balance that had kept Earth safe was about to collapse. But she was no longer the Empress. She was a 17-year-old girl with no weapons, no loyal fleet, and no access to the technologies that had once made her the most powerful being in the galaxy. All she had was her knowledge and the desperate hope that 3 years of forced humility had taught her something about surviving without absolute power. "Agent Morrison?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Patterson, the school's guidance counselor, and Sarah felt a surge of relief as the older woman approached their table. "I wasn't expecting you today. Is there a problem with Sarah's college applications?" The Altarian's disguise solidified again, and she turned to face the guidance counselor with a professional smile. "Just a routine follow-up interview. Nothing to worry about." Sarah realized that somehow the alien had infiltrated the school's administrative systems. She was posing as a college recruiter or government agent, using humanity's own bureaucracy as cover for her operation. It was exactly the kind of subtle infiltration tactic that Sarah herself had once employed against primitive civilizations. "Actually," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger, "I was just telling Agent Morrison that I need to get to my physics class. Mr. Rodriguez gets really upset when students are late." Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "Sarah's right. She's one of our most dedicated students. Perhaps you could schedule something after school hours?" The Altarian's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "Of course. Sarah, would you be available this evening, say around 8 o'clock? "I'll have to check with my parents," Sarah said, knowing she would be spending the evening figuring out how to disappear without endangering her adopted family. After the guidance counselor left, the Altarian leaned closer to Sarah's table. "Don't make the mistake of thinking you can run, Your Majesty. We've been tracking you for months. Every step you take, every word you speak, we're watching." "Then you know I'm not the same person I was," Sarah said quietly. "I'm just a student now. I have no power, no army, no threat to anyone." "Perhaps," the Altarian said, "but that's not really up to you to decide, is it? The Council of Nine has some questions about certain technologies you developed. Technologies that seem to be surfacing in some very interesting ways." Sarah felt the world shift beneath her feet. "What technologies?" "The temporal displacement matrix you use to escape justice, for one thing. Do you really think such a revolutionary breakthrough would stay secret forever? Every major power in the galaxy is now working on their own versions. The Centauri have already successfully tested a prototype." The implications hit Sarah like a meteor impact. If multiple galactic powers were developing temporal technology, it meant the timeline itself was at risk. The careful balance of history that had allowed humanity to eventually rise to dominance could be shattered by rival species going back to eliminate their future competitors. "You idiots," Sarah breathed. "Do you have any idea what you're tampering with? Temporal mechanics isn't like building a faster ship. One mistake could unravel the entire causal chain." "Which is exactly why the Council wants to speak with you," the Altarian said. "You're the only one who successfully built and operated a stable temporal displacement device. We need that knowledge. And if I refuse?" The alien's smile turned cold. "Then we take what we need from this quaint little world. I understand Earth has approximately 8 billion inhabitants. I'm sure we can find a few thousand volunteers for our research programs." Sarah felt something dark and familiar stirring in her chest. It was the same cold fury that had once driven her to reduce entire star systems to debris fields. For a moment, she could almost feel the weight of the neural crown on her head again, could almost sense the vast networks of power and authority that had once been hers to command. "You're threatening my people," she said, and her voice carried an undertone that made several nearby students unconsciously shiver and look around nervously. "I'm making a practical observation," the Altarian replied. "The galaxy has moved on since your disappearance, Your Majesty. New powers have risen, old alliances have shifted. Earth is now seen as a valuable research opportunity rather than the protected homeworld of a galactic emperor." The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Students began gathering their belongings and heading to their next classes. Sarah remained seated, her mind working through tactical scenarios she had hoped never to consider again. "I need time to think," she said finally. "You have until tonight," the Altarian said, standing and smoothing down her business suit. 8 o'clock, Sarah. Don't disappoint us. And please don't do anything rash. We have surveillance teams monitoring your parents' activities. It would be unfortunate if they suffered consequences for your poor decisions." After the alien left, Sarah sat alone in the emptying cafeteria, her hands trembling with suppressed rage and terror. Everything she had worked for, all the careful planning and self-imposed exile, was crumbling around her. Worse, her presence on Earth had now made her adopted world a target for forces beyond its ability to comprehend or resist. She thought about her parents, who had given her a home and a chance at a normal life without ever knowing what she truly was. She thought about her classmates, who worried about grades and relationships and college applications, blissfully unaware that their planet was about to become a battlefield in a war between civilizations they couldn't even imagine. Most of all, she thought about the choice that lay before her. She could surrender herself to the Council of Nine and hope they would leave Earth alone. But she knew from bitter experience that galactic powers rarely kept their promises to beings they considered inferior. Once they had what they wanted from her, Earth would become nothing more than a footnote in their expansion plans. Or she could fight. But fighting meant embracing the darkness she had spent 3 years trying to suppress. It meant becoming the Empress again, with all the terrible power and responsibility that title carried. Sarah gathered her books and walked to her physics class. But her mind was already far away, calculating probabilities and strategic options with the cold efficiency of someone who had once held the fate of civilizations in her hands. Mr. Rodriguez was explaining electromagnetic induction, but Sarah was thinking about the electromagnetic pulse cannons she had once used to disable enemy fleets. By the time the final bell rang, she had made her decision. That evening, Sarah sat at the dinner table with her parents, listening to her father discuss his day at the accounting firm and her mother share gossip from her job at the hospital. They looked so normal, so innocent, so completely unprepared for what was coming. Sarah realized that this might be the last time she sat with them as their daughter rather than as their protector. "Mom, Dad," she said during a pause in the conversation, "I need to tell you something important." Her parents looked at her with the patient attention they had learned to give their troubled daughter. They had no idea she was about to shatter their understanding of reality itself. "I'm not who you think I am," Sarah began, choosing her words carefully. "And some very dangerous people are going to try to hurt our family because of who I really am." Her father set down his fork, his expression shifting to concern. Sarah, honey, are you having one of your episodes again? Do we need to call Dr. Martinez? This isn't a psychological episode, Sarah said firmly. I need you both to listen very carefully. In about 2 hours, I'm going to leave this house. After I'm gone, some people might come looking for me. If they do, you need to act like you don't know anything about where I went. Can you do that for me? Her mother reached across the table to touch her hand. Sarah, you're scaring us. What kind of people? Are you in some kind of trouble at school? Sarah looked into their worried faces and felt her heart breaking. These good people had taken in a damaged teenager and loved her unconditionally, never knowing they were harboring the galaxy's most wanted fugitive. They deserved better than to become collateral damage in a war between species. I love you both, she said quietly. More than you'll ever know. But I can't let you get hurt because of me. She excused herself from the table and went upstairs to her room, where she began preparing for a confrontation she had hoped would never come. Hidden in various locations around her bedroom were items that would have seemed like harmless teenagers' belongings to anyone who didn't know their true purpose. A pen that was actually a molecular disruptor. A bracelet containing enough compressed antimatter to level a city block. A seemingly ordinary smartphone that could access quantum communication networks spanning half the galaxy. She had built these tools in secret over the past 3 years, using knowledge from her previous life and components scavenged from Earth's primitive but surprisingly adaptable technology. As she prepared to leave her room, Sarah caught sight of herself in the mirror. She still looked like a frightened 17-year-old girl, all sharp angles and nervous energy. But there was something different in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there that morning. The Empress was waking up, and the galaxy was about to remember why entire civilizations had once trembled at the mention of her name. The warehouse on the outskirts of Portland looked abandoned from the outside, its rusted metal walls and broken windows suggesting years of neglect. But as Sarah approached the building at exactly 8 o'clock, her enhanced senses detected the subtle energy signatures of advanced shielding technology and cloaking fields. The Altarians had chosen their meeting place well. She had changed clothes since leaving her parents' house, trading her typical jeans and sweater for dark tactical gear she had acquired through carefully laundered purchases over the past 3 years. The molecular disruptor was concealed in a wrist sheath, while the antimatter device hung from a chain around her neck, disguised as an ordinary pendant. Most importantly, she wore a thin circlet of metal around her head, hidden beneath her dark hair. The neural interface wasn't the same as her old imperial crown, but it would have to do. She had built it using salvaged components from military satellites and quantum processors stolen from various tech companies. It lacked the raw power of her original equipment, but it still allowed her to interface directly with electronic systems and amplify her consciousness across networked devices. 2 figures emerged from the shadows as she approached the warehouse entrance. They appeared human at first glance, but Sarah's trained eye caught the subtle tells that marked them as shape-shifted aliens. The way they moved was too fluid, too coordinated. Their breathing patterns were wrong for humans at Earth's atmospheric pressure. "Your Imperial Majesty," one of them said with mock formality. "Thank you for accepting our invitation." "Let's get this over with," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "You want information about temporal technology. I want guarantees that Earth will be left alone. Let's see if we can reach an understanding." The aliens led her into the warehouse, where the interior had been completely transformed. Advanced holographic projectors created the illusion of a proper meeting chamber, complete with the ceremonial banners of the Council of 9. Sarah counted at least a dozen figures arranged around a central discussion area, representing most of the major galactic powers. At the center stood someone Sarah recognized immediately, despite the human disguise. Commander Vex High of the Altarian Intelligence Corps, a being she had personally defeated in 3 separate military campaigns. The recognition was clearly mutual, as his disguised features shifted into a satisfied smile. "Hello again, Empress," Vex High said. "You look well. Smaller than I remember, but then time has a way of diminishing us all." "Some more than others," Sarah replied, taking note of the defensive positions around the chamber. "I assume you're speaking for the Council in this matter?" "In part," Vex High said, "though I should mention that not all of our colleagues were satisfied with a simple negotiation. Some argued for more direct methods of information extraction." As if summoned by his words, the air in the chamber began to shimmer and distort. Sarah felt a familiar tingling sensation across her skin as a transport beam materialized 3 more figures in the center of the room. These newcomers made no attempt to disguise their alien nature. The first was a Void Stalker, one of the galaxy's most feared assassin species. Its chitinous black carapace gleamed under the artificial lights, and its multiple eyes tracked Sarah's movements with predatory intent. The second was a Psi-Witch from the Andromeda Collective, her ethereal form crackling with barely contained psychic energy. The third was something Sarah had hoped never to encounter again: a Harvester. The biomechanical nightmare stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body a fusion of organic tissue and advanced machinery that defied conventional understanding of life and death. During her reign, Sarah had fought a bitter war against the Harvester fleets, managing to drive them back to the galactic rim through a campaign of such brutal efficiency that even her own allies had been horrified. "Now this brings back memories," the Harvester said, its voice a synthesized harmony of organic vocal cords and electronic modulators. The little human empress who thought she could dictate terms to her betters. Sarah felt the old, familiar cold spreading through her chest, the battle calm that had once made her the most feared military commander in galactic history. Her hand moved imperceptibly closer to the molecular disruptor, while her neural interface began establishing connections with every electronic device in the surrounding area. "I was hoping we could handle this diplomatically," she said to Vex High. "But it seems you've brought some friends who prefer more direct approaches." "The Council felt it was important to demonstrate that you are no longer in a position to make demands," Vex High replied. "You are one teenage girl on a primitive world, cut off from all the resources that once made you powerful. The temporal displacement technology is the only thing keeping you alive, and we need that information. And if I refuse?" The Psi-Witch stepped forward, psychic energy dancing around her fingers like living lightning. "Then we take what we need from your mind and leave your homeworld a burned cinder floating in space. The choice is yours, former Empress." Sarah looked around the chamber, calculating odds and escape routes with the tactical precision that had once allowed her to defeat entire battle fleets. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and operating with severely limited resources. Any normal person would have surrendered immediately. But Sarah Chen was not normal. She never had been. "You know," she said conversationally, "I've spent the last 3 years trying to convince myself that I was better off without the power, that living as an ordinary human was somehow noble, somehow redemptive for all the terrible things I did as Empress." Her neural interface completed its infiltration of the warehouse's electronic systems, giving her access to everything from the lighting controls to the advanced alien communication networks the Council was using to coordinate their operation. "But sitting here, listening to you threaten my family and my world, I'm starting to remember why I took that power in the first place," Sarah continued. "The galaxy is full of bullies and predators who mistake restraint for weakness." The Voidstalker's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Your human arrogance remains unchanged. You are alone and powerless. What can one small girl do against the combined might of the galactic powers?" Sarah smiled, And for the first time in 3 years, it was not the nervous expression of a frightened teenager, but the cold, predatory grin of someone who had once commanded forces capable of reshaping solar systems. Let me show you what this small girl learned during her vacation. Her neural interface activated with a pulse of energy that sent feedback cascading through every connected system in the warehouse. The holographic projectors overloaded and exploded in showers of sparks. Emergency lighting bathed the chamber in blood-red illumination as Sarah's consciousness expanded across the building's entire electronic network. But she didn't stop there. The alien communication systems provided her with access to orbital platforms and scout ships positioned throughout Earth's solar system. Her mental touch spread like a virus through their networks, taking control of weapons systems and navigation computers with the same ease she had once commanded her Imperial fleet. Impossible, the Psi-Witch snarled, launching a psychic attack that would have shattered the mind of any ordinary human. But Sarah had faced psychic assault from beings far more powerful, and her neural interface converted the mental attack into raw data that she absorbed and redirected. The harvester moved with inhuman speed, its biomechanical limbs extending razor-sharp appendages toward Sarah's throat. She activated the molecular disruptor without conscious thought, the weapon reducing the creature's arm to its constituent atoms before it could reach her. "You want to know about temporal technology?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying an undertone of power that made the warehouse's metal walls vibrate in sympathy. "Let me give you a practical demonstration." She activated the antimatter device around her neck, but instead of using it as an explosive, she channeled its energy output through her neural interface. The warehouse filled with crackling energy as Sarah opened a controlled temporal rift in the space between herself and her attackers. "This is what happens when you threaten my people," she said, and her voice now carried the authority that had once made galactic empires kneel. "This is what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness." The temporal rift expanded, creating a localized time distortion that aged everything it touched at an accelerated rate. The Voidstalker's exoskeleton cracked and crumbled as centuries passed in seconds. The Psi-Witch's energy form began to dissipate as her connection to the psychic realm was severed by temporal displacement. Vex High and the other council representatives backed away in terror, their disguises flickering as their concentration broke. "This is impossible!" the Altarian commander shouted. "You have no fleet, no resources." "I don't need a fleet," Sarah replied, her consciousness now interfacing with every piece of alien technology in Earth's solar system. "I am the technology, I am the weapon, and I am done hiding." With a thought, she triggered overload cascades in the alien scout ships orbiting Earth. Nuclear fires bloomed in the darkness of space as vessels that had been preparing to bombard the planet were consumed by their own power cores. She reached out through quantum communication networks to touch alien installations across the galaxy, leaving digital viruses that would spread chaos through their military networks for years to come. "You came here expecting to find a broken refugee hiding on a primitive world," Sarah said, advancing on the surviving council representatives as the temporal rift continued to expand. "Instead, you found someone who spent 3 years studying your weaknesses, learning your communication protocols, and preparing for exactly this moment." She gestured, and holographic displays materialized around the warehouse, showing real-time tactical information from across known space. Fleet positions, supply lines, political weak points, all the intelligence networks she had been quietly infiltrating since her arrival on Earth. "Did you really think I was just going to school and pretending to be normal?" she asked. "Every day for 3 years I've been preparing. Every night I've been building weapons you can't detect and establishing networks you don't know exist. You thought you were hunting a helpless teenager, but you were actually walking into the web of someone who once conquered half the galaxy." The harvester, its body partially regenerated from backup systems, made one final desperate attack. Sarah didn't even bother to move. Her neural interface detected the creature's approach and activated a localized gravity field that compressed it into a sphere of dense matter the size of a marble. "The difference between my reign as Empress and what happens next," Sarah said, her voice now echoing with harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, "is that this time I won't make the mistake of showing mercy to my enemies." Vexhai fell to his knees, his Altarian pride finally broken by the display of power he was witnessing. "Please, your Imperial Majesty, we can negotiate. The Council can be convinced to leave Earth alone." "The Council?" Sarah laughed, and the sound contained no warmth whatsoever. "The Council is finished. Did you think I would limit myself to defending just one world? Every major power that sent representatives to this meeting is about to discover that their home systems are under attack by their own automated defense networks." She was lying, of course. Her actual capabilities were far more limited than she was suggesting. But the fear in their eyes told her that the bluff was working. These beings had grown comfortable with their power in the years since her disappearance, and the sudden reminder of what human ingenuity combined with advanced technology could accomplish had shattered their confidence. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah continued, the temporal rift finally stabilizing into a controlled distortion field around her position. "You're going to return to your respective governments and deliver a message. Earth is under my protection. Any attempt to interfere with this world or its people will be met with the same response you've witnessed here." She gestured toward the harvester's compressed remains and the aging corpses of the other attackers. "I've spent 3 years learning to be human again, but if you force me to, I can remember how to be the Empress who made your predecessors beg for death." The surviving aliens scrambled for their transport devices, desperation overriding any remaining dignity. As they prepared to leave, Sarah's voice followed them with one final warning. "And tell your masters that if anyone comes looking for temporal technology again, they'll find it, in the form of a temporal weapon that can age entire star systems to death in moments. I've had 3 years to improve on my original designs." After they were gone, Sarah stood alone in the ruined warehouse, surrounded by the debris of her carefully maintained secret identity. The neural interface was already feeding her reports from across the globe as human governments detected the energy signatures of the alien technology that had been operating in their territory. She had perhaps 6 hours before the world's intelligence agencies started asking questions she couldn't answer without revealing the truth about humanity's future. 6 hours to decide whether Sarah Chen could continue to exist or whether the galaxy's prodigal empress had finally come home. Looking up at the stars visible through the warehouse's broken roof, Sarah made her choice. The girl who had wanted nothing more than to live a normal life was gone, sacrificed to protect the world that had given her sanctuary. In her place stood someone who had learned that sometimes the greatest mercy was to be feared by those who would prey on the innocent. The Empress had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same. But this time, she would build her empire not on conquest and domination, but on the protection of those who could not protect themselves. Starting with one small blue world that had taught her the difference between ruling through fear and ruling through love. The stars themselves seemed to pulse with anticipation as Sarah Chen began planning humanity's true entry into galactic civilization. Not as conquerors or victims, but as the guardians of something far more precious than any empire. They would be the guardians of hope itself.